everyone's lives. We're all dependent on a big, big scam, which is held up with great mystique, so as we can't get into it in any big, big depth. But adding things up and subtracting them is rather simple. Basic sums, we used to call it at school. Basic sums. That's all it is, folks. So much dressed up in mystique and all the rest of it and fancy terminology, you're being conned. That's how tricksters use chronology. But anyway, it says, news loses its frightening character when it offers information for which the listener already has a ready explanation in his mind. It's been given to you, you see, or for which you can easily find one. The great force of propagandalizing, giving modern man all-embracing, simple explanations and massive doctrinal causes, without which he could not live with the news. That's from the same book, Propaganda, by Jacques Ellul. And also, modern propaganda reaches individuals enclosed in the mass and as participants in that mass. Yet it also aims at a crowd. One of the first ones that came out for the public to read as was called The Crowd, in fact, before Bernays. But it says, but it only as a body composed of individuals. And a crowd, that's all a crowd is. And it says, what does this mean? So you're an individual, but you're in a crowd. It says, first of all, that the individual never is considered as an individual, but always in terms of what he has. Get this part, it's very important. What you have in common with others, such as his motivations, his writings, or his myths, you see. And that's very important because even years ago, when it came out initially that the government and all these servers and so on were giving professors at universities, who also get black budgets from governments too, and the big foundations to study all of us, they were already trying to find out your clusters, those that you email to, chat to, and so on. What do you have in common with them? That's all to do with perfecting all propaganda techniques, you understand. That's what it's for. So the more info they have on you, the more predictable you are. It's very important in a totalitarian system that we all be incredibly predictable. And unfortunately, most folk are now today because they put all their private thoughts out, even their ramblings, instantly out there, some of them, and is picked up. It says, propaganda tends to make the individual live in a separate world. He must not have outside points of reference. He must not be allowed a moment of meditation. That's very important. Or reflection. That's where you're bombarded. The more hype you put into it, your mind switches off. And they got this technique, by the way, in the US, more than anywhere else. They got it from the US by watching the old tent preachers back in the early 1900s. And I'll explain that when I come back after this break.
You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, because you can handle the truth.
Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix, talking about propaganda. It's a huge area to cover, actually, propaganda, and you can't do it in an hour even, but they could certainly give many lectures on it altogether, but propaganda has many facets that work. In fact, you're trained from birth onwards through different phases of these. They use the milestones for children, how they learn and so on, but they use milestones in propaganda too, according to your age group as well, as you go on and on and on, preparing you for more propaganda down the road. But also, as I've mentioned before, propaganda tends to make the individual live in a separate world. That's awfully important. He must not have outside points of reference. He must not be allowed a moment of meditation or reflection. And instead, successful propaganda will occupy every moment of the individual's life. Through posters, loudspeakers, when he's out walking, through radio and newspapers at home. Now, as I say, they really studied, we've been so well studied down through many centuries, that if you go into the histories and read even why Benjamin Franklin, who, a very interesting character, who had many faces, you might say, and many roles. But he said, when I'm a Mohammedan in the Middle East, if I was in the Middle East, he says, and at home I'm a Christian. If I'm a Christian, didn't believe in Christianity at all. But he also, and so on and so on. In other words, he would take on the persona of a person, wherever country he would happen to be in. And he brought over John Wesley, I think it was John Wesley, and not because he liked the guy, but he even built a church for him. The problem was, the reason he did it actually was because Wesley had a fantastic way of controlling crowds of listeners. Very, very important. And he could sway their emotions, and it's very important too. And the tent preachers carried this on into the 20th century, and in the early 20th century. It still goes on today in TV evangelism. It's all the same techniques that are used, only now they go into it big time Hollywood productions almost, with big speakers, mixing boards, lighting specialists and all the rest of it to hype up the emotion or darken a certain point of trepidation, that kind of stuff, you see. But if you notice the tent preacher types are the kind that get on television and raking the cash big time, like Benny Hinn. The ones that pass the 5-gallon pails around to get all the cash, you know. You'll find that they talk faster than someone, than an auctioneer even. And they start off by hitting emotional points. What worries everyone? Well, it's cash. Can you survive another day, another week, whatever? Are you going to have a job? Are you going to stay pretty fit? Are you going to get sick? Or are other folk already sick around you? Are you sick? Things that everyone will get to eventually, and it hits them, of course, and then they go faster and faster and faster, like a machine gun. And what happens then? You see, your firewall again has to crash. It literally crashes, unless you walk out. Because if you're trying to follow the guy, he's going to lose you so fast, because as you're trying to take the points that he's making, very, very quick points, he's already on to the next one and the next one, and eventually you just sit back and you're getting downloaded. Boom, 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 boom. Your firewall's down, it's crashed, and you're being downloaded. And the guy's hypnotized you basically in a very real sense. And he becomes a godlike character to you in that particular state, because I see your firewall is your first defense for anything. When someone's talking to you, you'll say, well, I agree with that point, but I don't agree with this point, and so on and so on. That's how it works. When he's talking like an auctioneer, you can't do that. It's so fast. So you can't be allowed a moment of thought or whatever. It's just boom, 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 boom. And you understand too that much propaganda can be with the agenda, or what appears to be the opposing agenda. Because you're dealing with professionals down through centuries of revolutions. I hope you understand that point. It's so important to you're not just living in the present. You're the product of many revolutions that have gone before that never worked out the way that the people who that did all the fighting, whatever, or even the social revolutions thought that they would end up being. It's actually called progressiveness, as I say. It's a progressive system, and it's never defined to you because you're not in the right societies. And they know how to bring it on and how to prepare you for the next one, because they also believe in, remember, going back to your old history classes, you didn't just have the Stone Age and the Bronze Age and Iron Age and all the rest of it, and different ages. You also have different cultural changes too as you go along, and new systems. You even had systems where you bartered. Then you go into the trading for gold or silver, because certain people had monopolies on that at the time. And then you go into the coining of things, and then we go into paper, which is the promise to pay, etc. And even that can be a big lie too, because they won't pay you in the species that came out with in the first place. Anyway, the thing is, you're being prepared for the next system. Now, the big boys at the top that plan the world and plan the future are always preparing the future. You live in a system where you think, I hope nothing gets worse than it is. That's why we all think. I hope it doesn't get worse. I hope prices don't go any higher than they're doing and inflation goes up. I hope wages won't be frozen, and they really have been frozen since about the 1980s in North America, even for starting wages and so on. So you have all these trepidations and hopes, etc. And you want things to stay much the same and just don't get any worse for a little while. At least till you're long gone, you see. Then they can start it all over. You don't really care about other people or what's to come. That's the way you've been trained to see things. And the big boys at the top already have their plans for the next revolutions. And most revolutions, remember, are pretty bloodless. As cultural changes, cultural attitudes that are changed for the coming systems. And what they often say is, we can't go on like this. And these are the ones who are opposing the system, and you don't realize that they're often working for the system, because the big boys have no intention of going on like this. You understand how simple it really is? So be very careful about propaganda. It works in many ways. Don't allow yourself to be overloaded by a fast-talking, I always talk about the auctioneer, because there was a song about that a long time ago. It's quite fast indeed, but it was very appropriate to the same as the tent preachers, who could knock your socks off and everything else off, and probably take everything off you too and get rich by fast talking. And you couldn't keep up with them. You couldn't criticize point by point. It was just too fast for you. And then you also get into the sway. It's another part too. When you're in a big crowd, most folks start to behave the same way. That's why you put leaders into crowds, and people will mimic what they do. It's so easy to do it with them. It's well understood. If you look into propaganda, even in entertainment, go back into the days of Frank Sinatra. And the big, you understand, stars are created not by themselves, by the big creation machine that's in the entertainment industry. Remember that. Always has been. And that's if the guy gets rich, or at least he appears to be rich. Often they're not, because the big boys own record companies, own pretty well everything. But anyway, getting back to what I'm saying about entertainment, you understand that the big machine creates the stars. And back in Frank Sinatra's day, they came out with a new stunt, and that was to make the crowd, mainly women, of course, because that was who he appealed to, and that's who he'd been trained to appeal to, started throwing their underwear, taking it off and throwing it at the stage. It was way back then. And it simply went further from there. Now the rest of the women would start copying what the other ones were doing, to be risque, you see. Everyone wants to be in the cutting edge. Oh, well, I'm risque, I'll show my pals, etc. Yeah. That's how it's done, folks. So never lose who you are in any kind of crowd or setting. I don't care what kind it is. Always retain yourself. Even though the pressure around you is trying to fight that and destroy retaining the self. Because it really does in a crowd. There's a whole science there in itself, in fact, just that part alone. But I just thought I'd touch on propaganda tonight because of the massive propaganda we're getting on the next build-up, and people think it's all crashing down for Obama, etc., which nothing of the kind is going to happen here. Nothing of the kind is going to happen. And if anything, which caught me today, was one article I was reading about him saying that you didn't really need the authority of the Congress to go to war with Syria. Technically he's right, because I've never bored with the Constitution for years. But the thing is too, he said, but I thought, because there's been some objections, I thought I would put it to Congress, and I mean, he thought, or he decided, that's what he said, I decided to put it to Congress. No, you don't decide, Sonny, because it's supposed to be the law. That's in the Constitution. You have no choice but to go that way, although you've ignored it in the past, many times. And so have many other people before you, of course, because that's how the public again were trained by familiarity. Well, the last guy did it, so the guys did it way back, and blah, blah, blah. That's how it's done. They call them policing actions now, too, or stability exercises. Very Orwellian, of course, where you have ministries of peace. They go and slaughter to bring the peace, you know. And then they plunder the country, grab all of its accounts across the world, and pillage it, and rape it, and leave it dysfunctional and at the Stone Age. Back with more after this. Hi folks, we're back, cutting through the matrix, talking about propaganda. Everything is propaganda, isn't it? And sometimes we get sucked into it, trying to fight it as well. And then you end up being a part of a propaganda system without checking the facts that you're spouting out. You're repeating them. But logic isn't taught, as I say, anymore in school or reasoning, but it's actually an art of reasoning, how you come to reason. And logic is a very important part of it too. And again, you can only depend on yourself for logic. No one else is going to do it for you. If they do it for you, then you're a follower. If you're a follower, you're brainwashed.